Well, good morning, everybody. To get things started today, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to my grandma. She turns 93 today. She's an amazing woman. She lives over in West Central Illinois, and she's just, I got to talk to her for an hour yesterday on the phone. I talked to her as much as I can, and it was interesting because I shared with her some of the stuff I learned from the Brazilians and the Argentinian growers I got to talk to yesterday. So she loves to listen to me go on and on about that stuff, and she's just an amazing woman. So, Grandma, if you're watching today, just happy birthday. Oh, and by the way, your sister, and we talked about this, she lives over in Virginia, Abingdon, Virginia. She's going to turn 100 next month. So I've got some longevity, at least on the female side of the family there. But anyway, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to be walking through this month after I get through some of the recent changes. I'm going to give you my normal kind of multi-model analysis. We're going to blow this out into a little bit of a longer range, looking as far as we can through September. But at the end, I've got a lot for you about South America. So if you just want to get to the South America stuff, get right over to these slides right in through here. Okay, we're going to talk about La Niña, and I'm going to show you 3 or 4 of the slides that I actually showed them last night. Okay, you've been staring, though, at an image that looks at the last 24 hours of temperature change, and we've been talking about this frontal boundary that's been moving through the middle part of the United States, and it's really knocked the temperatures back on the back side. Yesterday, watch this, if I take you back, that frontal boundary initiated some nasty severe storms in the midwestern part of the United States. We had deep convection over parts of the lower Mississippi River Valley, so some locally heavy rain here. We had numerous reports of severe wind damage and some hail out of the storms that were on top of the Appalachian Mountains and into parts of the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast as well. And just looking at yesterday's severe storm reports, 214 so far, including 4 tornadoes right up here around Minnesota. So this would be the second time this week that we've hit this area with quite bad severe storm damage in this region, but just dotted throughout parts of the east as well. This has been a pretty potent week in terms of kind of late summer severe weather delivery. I did want to show you a little bit closer view of that wildfire smoke in Idaho. You remember earlier this week we saw that smoke just screaming behind this deeper low, which has now moved out of parts of Saskatchewan over into parts of Manitoba and will very quickly this morning be into Ontario. But there is a lot of air quality issues going on right now in the west, as you can see as the sun set last night with the fires in California and several in Idaho at this point. And this is getting really deep into the Snake River Valley, as you can see from yesterday's imagery, and it's all the way here over into Wyoming. I have a good friend here named Lizzie. I work with her. She lives in Laramie. I'd be curious to know what things look like in terms of that smoke content. But if we look at the radar, this is where things sit this morning. And if we just watch this long animation from last night through this morning, we can see a lot of those storms and that frontal boundary, which is going to struggle early this morning to maintain its strength. But what I wanted to spend just a moment doing was kind of just looking back and trying to see what the last few hours of precip have looked like. So you just noticed the last 24 hours here. There's the deeper convection in the south. There's the strong storms, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Mid-Atlantic, and here's our large front connected to our low. We add that to the previous days. This is the previous 3 days. We can see very clearly here kind of the progress of that storm system, which remember dropped some snow right in through here at very high elevation. We had frost events that hit into parts of Idaho. I appreciate the comments on that. Isolated storms down in parts of the southern plains and along the Gulf Coast out of this too. But then we add 4 more days to it. This is the whole week. So this was through early this morning, looking at just this last week's worth of precipitation. And as I think hard about what August did, August was not a month of any sort of uniformity, especially if you look at the first 3 weeks versus the last week. And I want to do that with the precip statistics. This is how things looked from the 1st of August to the 22nd of August, where the statistics were biased extremely wet up the East Coast, especially in the Carolinas due to Debbie. Now, after Debbie went through, there are places here that haven't measured any rainfall, so we're waiting patiently to see what the storms could possibly do later on this week as the heat finally builds into this area. We're going to get some storms to pop. The one place I can say that was consistently dry, just broad area consistently dry, was here. This whole chunk of the mid-south, the southeast, along the lower Mississippi River Basin, just exceptionally dry. And it wasn't just the front half of the month, it was the back half of the month as well. Take note of the dryness we have in the western Corn Belt, pockets throughout the central and eastern Corn Belt as well. And down throughout much of Texas, it was a month where we missed out on a lot of precipitation. And I did have someone comment the other day, about what was going on in around this part of Texas. We began the year exceptionally wet. We had a derecho event. We then got hit by Beryl, and then went like 35 days without a drop of rainfall. And now some of the new forecasts are expecting flooding, flooding back in this area. Well, this is just the first 22 days. This is what happens when you go from August 22nd through the 29th, through yesterday. And again, that drought area expanded. See that? And this is where we saw a major drop in precipitation, flash drought developing in that area, soil moisture getting just yanked out of the ground. And it was very dry on both the Ohio and the mid-Mississippi valleys. Come back to Texas, Oklahoma, pockets of Nebraska, Iowa, southern Wisconsin. This rain that's coming through right now is honestly kind of capping off what has been a drier 10 days or so with very, very high temperatures. I was in Iowa for most of this week. Temperatures there just deep into the 90s. In fact, earlier in the week, we were seeing heat indexes way up in the northwest part of Iowa that were, about 108, 110. But at the same time that was going on, deep lows kept rolling up the west coast, including the heavy rains in Northern California. And then we saw at the end of the week, that low that just curled up real tight here and is now moving over to Ontario. So I always just like looking at these precip stats. I find them to be very instructive on what's been going on, and they help me explain maps like this, which is the latest 40 centimeter modeled soil moisture data from NASA. And the concern here is the ongoing drought issue in this area. In fact, the CPC yesterday issued for this whole region a flash drought risk to start the month of September. So the rain that's going to try to come through this area right now is going to be critical to this whole corridor here. But that's not to miss out on what's going on in southeastern Nebraska. I've heard from many of you here getting into northeast Kansas how incredibly dry it is. If you've been reporting to me about the dryness that's in southeast Kansas, and take a look at this and through here. Whereas earlier in the summer we saw heavy rains rolling through this area, soil moisture has once again been depleted very quickly. The southeast has also been extremely dry because remember, Beryl's rains did not get to this part. Debbie's rains did not get to this part of Georgia. So just a few different areas to be on the lookout for, and if that helps explain the newest drought monitor, then that's I think where we need to land. So this drought continues. We've expanded drought in this area. It remains in the southern plains, and pockets of it have begun to show up in parts of the Corn Belt. The Northwest, from Montana and Wyoming all the way back to Washington, Oregon, just continues to expand in drought this summer. We've seen abnormally dry conditions now beginning to show up in California, which, remember, most of summer is supposed to be dry throughout a lot of California. So that drought monitor map, I think, is really telling us to how the end of this summer finished up. And what I'm curious about is mostly the forecast for September's dry. The wild card, I'm just going to say it again, it's hurricanes. But most of this September is dry. So what I'm worried about now really comes back to the Mississippi River, which this morning at Memphis was now 5.15 feet below low stage. And this is not necessarily a commentary that it's going to get as bad as it did last year, but it is below where it was 1 year ago today. Now, remember, last fall was exceptionally dry October, November, and December for much of the Mississippi Basin. And we know that September is going to come in dry, meaning this river level is probably going to drop off once again as we get into this month of September. So we need to be very aware of what that might mean in terms of traffic up and down the Mississippi River going forward. On the temperature side of things, again, I'm going to do the same thing. Let's just break up those first 22 days. Overall, we will remember August as being a cool August for a large section of the Midwest, the Mississippi, Ohio, and Missouri Basin. It will be remembered as exceptionally hot into Florida. And it's only been the last week or so that we've seen this, about 10 days or so, as that front stalled out, that all of the very heavy rain has come back to pockets of Florida. And remember, there are places that have been missed in Florida, even though there's been some heavy rain as of late. The Gulf Coast, Texas, all the way into the southwest, very, very hot. But because of that deeper low, the pair of lows that in the last 10 days have kind of rolled up the northwest coast, you can see the tail end of that time period was cool. And then look at recently. This is when we've had the frost events, the very cold air, the snow at very high elevations above about 9,000 feet here. And this last, 8 or 9 days of the month maintained exceptional heat in Texas that just recently broke out into the Midwestern United States and up through the plains. So I think what's important to realize here is that the heat wave that was, how long was it? 5 days at most that came into this part of the country. Still, when you look at a 8-day window, was not enough to offset, the cooler start to that. So that has been the summer in the Midwest, very short duration heat events. But that's a highly amplified pattern that got us there, and we have to ask questions as to whether or not that's going to continue, because that heat is certainly down in the southeast today, tomorrow, and through early next week, while much cooler air is coming into the Midwest and actually getting all the way down into Texas, which is good. So I wanted to bring you up to speed on a couple of maps we looked at earlier in the week. This is the newest growing degree day anomaly map. I just start counting them up beginning on April 1st. We look at the the difference from average, a 20-year average, and overall we can still find a pretty large region in the northern plains that's below average, the Northwest Corn Belt as well. And remember, what helps keep these numbers high is if you have some warmer overnight lows, since it's a base of 50, you can still accumulate a lot of GDDs despite not having the very hot temperatures. Because remember, the GDD calculations stop at 86. Anything over 86 degrees Fahrenheit, we start to count as a stress degree day. And so this is our newest stress degree day map. And what, again, it's showing you here is everywhere in green, we did not get over 140 units. So just, again, the idea here is that if you get over 140 units, some research done by Dr. Elwyn Taylor out of Iowa State back in 2013 suggests we start seeing yield loss in corn. But that number, that statistic, only applies for this region, the I-states, the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, maybe parts of Nebraska, but irrigated crops in Nebraska can outdo this. That's dryland corn farming research done in Iowa. So let's just be clear on what this value stands for. So with all that recap, let's now get into where this is going. Remember, we are concerned about temperatures getting into September because of some of the delays in the crop maturity because of the cooler weather. So you know what we're going to watch. We're going to keep an eye on Alaska. Over the next 5 days, yes, cooler air comes in, no frost threat, of course, with this in this part of the country. A lot of heat going back into the west. That's the next 5 days. This is day 5 through 10, and here's day 10 through 15. So this tells me that the pattern's relaxing a bit. In other words, it's starting to retreat north, lose some momentum temporarily. And we're going to open up a large ridge that's going to extend from parts of the west into the Canadian prairie. But if I were to see this kind of heat going here, then we'd start to have a major conversation about a lot of cold air. But in the near term, we're building up quite a bit of warm air in the central plains of the Canadian prairie. All right. Okay, from there, I want to just show you this pattern. I just mentioned what I think it's doing. Now let's watch it. As we go through Friday into Saturday, deep trough between the Hudson Bay and the Great Lakes. Ridge opens behind it. Still these lows sitting along the northwest coast. I'll show you the rainfall from that in a moment. But overall, this is not overly aggressive on the development of a really active pattern. And what I mean by that is if you're in the United States and we get lows coming in like this at times, like this one here, we know it's not bringing in a lot of cold air, but this is by next Saturday, how much moisture will it have to work with given there's a trough to its south? Okay, so sometimes this trough will steal from this one, making it drier, meaning I'm expecting as we get out into week 2 that the southeast is going to be wet. But a big ridge opens up behind it. Troughs continue to live along the Alaska, then off the west coast. And as a result, we just get a pattern that if it's cool here and there's a trough there, ridges are going to open. So there's going to be some warmth coming back into this pattern out of the Intermountain West into the Canadian prairie, into the Midwestern plains at times as we get out there fully into the week 2 time frame. Once we get beyond that, I just noticed that there's some broader troughing down in the southeast, which is why we continue to see wetter conditions being forecast there. But that pattern, as I kind of walk through it, isn't ringing a whole lot of alarm bells on highly anomalous weather that could be on the detrimental side. What I mean by that is there's some warmth in it, but overall it's a drier pattern. And as we approach fall, that's kind of a key part of fall for harvest. So just a couple of comments there on what you see. So this morning, the all hazards weather map, we have heat advisories out for parts of the Pacific Northwest and the interior there of the Columbia Basin. We still have some air quality issues across parts of the West, flood watches out here and also down to Louisiana. And as we kind of go forward in this pattern, this is the flow for today. So we've been keeping an eye on these tropical waves, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're looking at the lows that are a bit farther to the north, all curling again in and around the Bering Sea and in and around Alaska. That's key. We keep more low pressure there. That will prevent major warm-ups in this area that could lead to a big early frost for those folks that are going to be extremely sensitive to it. So we have a front that's sneaking through the country. You can see the flow on the back side of it. We're going to watch out for the severe weather out ahead of it again today. And I'll also be keeping a very close eye on what's along the Texas and Louisiana coast. I'll show you that in more detail in a moment. But here's today's severe storm outlook. So it's going to be along that front from parts of Michigan, this section of Ontario. I got a great picture earlier this week from one of you. I saw it on my phone while I was traveling of a beautiful shelf cloud in London, Ontario, which is here. But you can see the risk of some stronger storms here and also over in the Carolinas. Much needed rain possible out of this. Tomorrow, the front opens, continues to move, and we see this broader area from West Virginia and Virginia up to New York, where we have the risk of the strong to severe storms. So that would again be another day this week where we have this risk in this region. And then as we get out to day 3, the front's going to clear. And behind it, high pressure, a lot of just dry air in place. And all of our wettest conditions are going to stretch across the south, where we've seen some models change on just how much precip is expected there. So let's get into the high-res models. Here's the NAM first. We'll blow that up one more time. There we go. I thought it was a good initialization this morning as to where things were. And as we play forward throughout the day today, there could be some locally very heavy rain coming out of this part of Texas and Louisiana as the front pushes down from the north. So again, we talked about how this front could be a bit busted up and broken as it goes across Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, all the way back into Oklahoma and Texas. But along this, we will get some stronger storms today. So we need to be very weather aware. Keep your radar on your phone open and going so that you are just aware of what's going on. Outside of that, isolated storms in the southeast still. A lot of heat here. And I want to see these storms get into this area. We need the rain right here in this part of the southeast. So that's tonight. Getting into tomorrow morning early. This is midday Saturday. Working our way toward 5 p.m. Look at the moisture transport happening out of the Gulf of Mexico into Louisiana and southern Mississippi as the front kind of puts the squeeze here farther into the south and east with that high pressure trying to build in behind it. So that's what's going to initiate more storms tomorrow. So this is where that large area of slight risk is. We're going to watch those storms roll through there, potentially putting down some locally heavy rainfall. But once that front clears, much cooler air is coming in behind it, and we're going to see kind of a bit of a shift toward much drier weather in this region for a while. You can see that when I show you the WPC forecast. This is the 12Z run today. After this clears through this part of the Midwest, much drier air is going to be in place for a while. Our wettest conditions are going to be along the Gulf Coast and into Texas. You can see there where the heaviest rainfall is expected over the next 7 days. The NBM is in pretty good alignment with it, but this is the 0Z run, so that's why this is here. This is all moisture from the current system that's going through right now because the 0Z runs are initiated last night. And here's the 10-day from the NBM. Very, very wet down here. Some places have the potential for picking up several inches. I'm talking 6 to 8 inches of rainfall along the Gulf Coast. Next, let's go look at the artificial intelligence. Very similar forecast. That's the 7-day. Here's the 10. So a large area of very dry weather expected to form in this area of the country and press its way into the Midwest. So this is a lot of the rain happening right now that you see in this area. So much drier, but very wet across the south and potentially into the northeast. Then we get to the European model 7-day. We have the GFS 7-day. And this is just a look at these two models. And I was surprised to see that the European went drier in this part of Texas, while the GFS went much wetter. So that color represents a wet GFS. This is where the European is wetter. And so you'll notice that for much of the south, the European is a much wetter model. And we just need to keep an eye out on exactly how the precipitation pattern kind of plays out here. Now, this is only over the next 7 days. And one of the trickiest things about trying to figure out beyond that is going to be what's going on in the tropics. Because this morning, let's see if they've given an update here. Good, they just did their 7 a.m. update or 7:49 a.m. update. They've kept this about a 40% chance of developing here. And they got the one behind it at a 20%. And so if we look at some of the model data, we've got 3 different areas I think we're going to have to keep an eye on for the development of some tropical weather. So if I stop this here, we have one that starts here, moves through the Caribbean, a second behind it that's going to go like this, and a third behind that that could come in through there. So as we are getting into this month of September, Some of the things we talked about a lot this week are starting to take shape in the tropics. And as a result, we're going to start to see, I think, a bit more tropical activity. I want to make you very aware of something that's about to happen, though. Okay, we got through most of August with, it was Ernesto, which missed. It only hit, Bermuda. Debbie was early, major flooding throughout the southeast, wind event there as well. But after that, we didn't see much. And what I want to just kind of caution a lot of you with is that you might start to see popping up on social media with all sorts of hype. You might see animations like this. The GFS 6Z run today is trying to take whatever that thing was, this is the low that's out here, pull it into the Caribbean and then into the Gulf of Mexico right there, and basically create a powerful hurricane that hits somewhere between the Texas and Louisiana border. And I just want to be very clear here that when people put out these animations, they are doing a major disservice to meteorology, in my opinion, because we know that looking out there at the 250-hour forecast from a single model run, the likelihood of that being correct is very low. And some of the models, the GFS especially, has a tendency to go to very high amplitude. And what I mean by that is it tends to take systems and just explode them into bigger and bigger systems when you get out there beyond 10 days. It's a limitation of the modeling. And I just want you to be aware that you're going to start to see a whole lot of stuff like this. So that's, for example, the GFS run. If I were to show you the ECMWF, over 10 days with the ECMWF, let's go back and watch it again. You'll notice that it does something entirely different. And because this forecast run doesn't produce a massive hurricane that hits Louisiana and Texas, no one will show it to you. But it's all a part of the understanding of the system. And that's why I often show you these animations. We're like, look, this is the spread of possibilities. But to nail down specifics right now is something not even possible. And we have to remember that even the National Hurricane Center, these are the best in the business at doing this, right? They're like, hey, 40% chance it's got to survive the strong winds of the Caribbean first. So there's so much uncertainty with this, but we're going to have to watch it over this weekend to see how it evolves. So I do also want to let you know that typhoon Shanshan, Shanshan is how it's spelled, is still sitting and spinning over Japan. And some of the forecast models just leave it there all the way through this weekend into early next week. And that means it's going to be producing more, major flooding throughout Japan, which we took a look at just the other day. Okay, so back to the United States, though. I just took that quick jump to kind of talk to you a bit about the tropics. Over the next 10 days, who has the best chance at getting an inch of rainfall? It's our Gulf Coast. It's into the southeast. It's parts of Texas, and it's the northeast. This is right now, all right? So we have much drier air coming in behind this. Speaking of that drier air, let's go look at who's got the best chance at going under a half inch. And if we get that out again to 240 hours, I just want to tell you that this whole area is going to fill in with drier conditions as we go forward in the forecast. It's very dry in the west. Big ridge is starting to build in there. It's going to extend into the Canadian Prairie, and it's certainly going to be here. And you can see that in the day 8 through 14 forecasts. So this is the newest one from the CPC. This is the one from the European model. And here is the GFS. And I love it that these two models are in much better agreement now that I've got the coding fixed. So if you put a trough here and a trough there, and the flow opens up like this, that's a lot of dry air stuck in the middle part of the country. But with that broader trough still sitting over the southeast, the week 2 rainfall forecast is still wetter than average, starting really from the lower Mississippi Basin through the southeast into the mid-Atlantic and up toward the northeast. So that's where we're seeing the wetter conditions going forward. Okay, from here, let's talk temperatures before we get into the South American discussion. This is the newest frost map forecast for the next 7 days. Very high elevation frost events. That's what we're looking at here. If we look at those max temperatures, here's today's, getting into Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So there's the major cool down we are expecting this weekend. Heat hangs on in the southeast. The next ridge begins to open in the west. So by Tuesday into Wednesday, there it is. There's the much warmer air that's starting to build into this area as the cooler air replaces the heat that's on right now in the southeast. And by the time we get to next Thursday, we're going to be in some sort of pattern like this for a while. If you take a look at this, there's your next 5 days. And there's day 5 through 10. So there's lows here, So the opening up of the ridge, the cooler air exiting behind this low here. So this is going to start to move out. So day 5 through 10 into day 10 through 15. And the good news about that is that gets us halfway through September, and we're not yet seeing any sort of ingredients coming together for some sort of devastating early frost for the midsection of the country. And that's the area I've been focusing on a lot with the risk of this frost lately. So from there, what are some of the models saying? I'm going to take you back to the CFSV2. They've got that sticking around, that kind of pattern sticking around all the way through September. And you can just see very mild throughout the Canadian Prairie. In other words, they're just leaving it in place. Pattern losing a lot of its flow and momentum. No major heat in Alaska. That's what I'm on the lookout for. If we look at the extended outlook from the ECMWF all the way to mid-October now, higher pressure being left in this area, higher than normal, tends to produce warmer conditions in the Midwestern United States and the Great Plains. What I am not seeing yet, though, is a big buildup of ridging over Alaska at this stage going forward. And that's why if we kind of zoom in here on the United States and look at a 30-day precip map, we're drier overall. You can see drier conditions overall, but the model is going to continue to show very warm conditions overall too. Now what's interesting is this temperature pattern you see here is very typical of La Niña. We tend to start to get cooler, maybe a bit wetter in the northwest, but very mild and dry in the midsection of the country when La Niña begins to exert its influence. And the fact that I keep mentioning that the atmosphere is losing momentum, that's a very La Niña thing as well. So I have some questions as to whether or not La Niña is honestly beginning to exert some sort of an influence on this pattern. Because I've seen lately, if you look at the ocean temperatures, we've had quite a bit of cooler water beginning to show up here. And we looked earlier in this week. Remember, the trades are going here. They're also going over there. And if this starts to just take some of the flow, the momentum out of the westerlies, which is what La Niñas do, that would slide us into a pretty typical La Niña fall, which is more mild for a big section of the country and also a bit more on the drier side. The wild card's going to be hurricanes, which we now know the season's starting to get kind of ramp up. So take a look at this. If you look back over the last couple of days here, we've seen the ocean temperatures now drop below minus 0.5. And that's a simple threshold we look at for La Niña. So it's kind of had this downward trend, which means those trade winds are working hard on getting that water to upwell. I've also noticed that the Southern Oscillation Index, just one of the ways by which we measure a La Niña, it's still working its way up, which means those trade winds are getting stronger between Tahiti and Darwin. Now, putting that all together, I want to show you one last animation. Let's blow this up a bit. This would be South America here, and I'll just write Australia over here, or Indonesia. Sorry, I'm writing this with my finger, and I'm not very good. This is the top of the Pacific Ocean, and this is going down in depth. And what I want you to see is that starting back in June and July, we've had quite a bit of cold water here that's ready to upwell, meaning we could get, with some stronger trade winds, a whole lot more cold water beginning to show up in this area that would give us a much stronger signal that La Niña is coming in. And if we get that, again, for most of the United States, that's a bit of a mild and a bit more dry of a fall. It will be the Northwest that gets wet sooner than anyone else. And it will be the Gulf Coast that we have to watch carefully for tropical development, because the more La Niña builds, the better the conditions are for tropical development there. But I'll be honest, the folks that were most concerned about this animation were the people I was with last night. So I was with a group of Brazilians and also with Argentinians, and it was hilarious. They actually the Brazilians sat on the northern side of the room and the Argentinians sat on the southern side. Now, they were actually divided because they have to have everything I said interpreted into Portuguese, and they were into Spanish, although most of them spoke very, very fluent English. And I want to tell you what I learned last night. So first of all, no one in Brazil is worried about how dry the soil is right now. Yes, it was a very dry season, and there were a lot of comments about the wildfires lately. And I'm going to show you this real quick. I should have this pulled up, but let me just show you yesterday. If we look at the wildfire smoke here, just take a look at how much was in the atmosphere. Maybe it's a little easier if I show you there we go. All of this wildfire smoke. It's been very bad. The air quality has been terrible down to Sao Paulo earlier in the month. Many, many fires down there. So they're looking at this, but they know that if the monsoon comes in, it will knock that out in a hurry. I heard many comments that they've now had a lot of spring flooding in southern Brazil. Some of those growers were from, where were they from? They were from Sao Paulo. I think I had one from Rio Grande do Sul, but there's comments about the flooding in southern Brazil from this winter. That's normally the dry season in Brazil, but very wet conditions here. But on the Argentinian side of the room, this was a major concern for them. They say that lack of soil moisture was the result of the 3 years of drought we had before last year. So remember, last year was a recovery year. The years before that, this is what we've got. And then after we looked at this map, several of the Argentinian people in the room wanted to talk to me about a disease pressure that they're having. And that had to do with this. So apparently, we're now starting to see more of this in the United States as well. They were talking about how there is a bacteria that's being spread by this leafhopper that was bad this year because their winter did not get cold enough to kill a lot of it off, especially in the north. They commented that they needed at least, consistent temperatures below about -6. And if you look over the last 90 days, too much of the northern growing area didn't get there. And as a result, this insect bringing the bacteria pressure, that vector being the insect and the bacteria being the disease. Anyways, it's really increased the risk on corn. And the comment made to me, and listen, this is not me, this is just what I'm relaying information, was that that's going to take a pretty big hit on their corn acres, and they're going to go over to more beans because of the disease pressure. Now, I showed you the article from University of Missouri. Apparently back in mid-August, they published an article saying that they've seen some of this bacteria and the leafhopper in parts of the United States as well. And I'll tell you, we talked about this for about a half hour last night. They were very, very much wanting to inform me of what's going on here, so I wanted to share it with you. All right. So as we go forward now, I want to show you the near-term forecast. The monsoon is not going yet. Still very dry. Locally, some heavy rains in southern Brazil, Uruguay, pockets of Argentina, like from Buenos Aires over toward Cordoba. But as we look out there a bit longer term, I need you to understand that the only model right now that is aggressively calling for the beginning of the monsoon is the European model. And this is not the European model. This is the extended 35-day outlook from the GFS. When I flip this over to the European model, the weeklies, you'll see a much different scenario. Let's look at 30 days out. This is now what they're seeing going out. Here we go. Early October toward mid-October. The European model continues to call for better chances of the onset of the monsoon. It is the only model that is doing this right now, and it would be working against some of the bigger factors we have. So for example, La Niña. So I translated some of this to Spanish and Portuguese for them. These are the slides I presented last night. We've talked about this. It is NOAA that is the most aggressive of all of the forecasting centers on building in La Niña. But even their forecast doesn't match some of the models that they run. So we're questioning, hey, is this really going to be a big La Niña? Is it really going to have a high probability of forming? If we continue on the trend we just started in the last couple of weeks, the answer is yes. And this will be correct. But as it stands, there's still some uncertainty with this. And so that's why I told them we're not settled yet on the strength of this La Niña. Why they're concerned is because of two things. If La Niña comes in September to November, we tend to be drier in the south, and there tends to be a late start to the monsoon here. If we add in another factor, which is the Atlantic meridional mode, sorry, I mislabeled that. Atlantic, it should be AMM. The Atlantic meridional mode, we tend to be drier here as well, and drier in Argentina. And I think that's what influenced the IRI forecast, which I showed you earlier this week. So the European model is the outlier right now, suggesting an early arrival of the monsoon. If La Niña takes over, yes, it will show up north quickly and stay drier farther to the south. But it's got to outdo the Atlantic meridional mode. That's what we talked about yesterday. Remember that, the whole discussion about what some folks were calling the Atlantic La Niña? Okay, that's this. I want to show you the European model forecast now. So these maps are the same. There's the European model forecast for September, October, November. So again, it's still got drier risks in this area, maybe correlating better with the AAM. The AMM. I'm so sorry for all these indexes going forward here. But to finish this up, November through January, this is the new forecasts that were released this month. We'll get new ones in a couple of weeks. And overall, if this corridor does get hit with near normal or wetter than normal precipitation, that's a huge part of Brazil's soybean and corn crop with more than adequate rainfall. And while there's risk of being drier in southern Brazil, that's associated with La Niña, I can't say that the European model is too aggressive on bringing in drought conditions there. But this is why they asked me, is this going to be a problem? And I said, it will be a problem unless you get your just-in-time rains. And so we were very concerned about how all of that was going to be playing out over the coming weeks and months. So maybe there is some more uncertainty than I've been leading on to in my forecast videos about Brazil, because we've kind of looked a lot at the European model, trying to go wet, saying that if this happens, they plant fast. But I don't know that this model has perfectly nailed down what's going to be happening once we finish September, getting into October. I mean, it's not even September yet, so I need to remember that. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with you today. We'll talk to you again on Tuesday. I am going to take Monday off. I hope you all have a good long weekend as well, and we'll pick up on Tuesday. Thanks.